Today we're at Cheraw State Park, located in the Sandhill Coastal Plain border region of South Carolina. We are going to begin walking the Turkey Oak Trail. This is a nature trail that was built several years ago here at the park, or cleared I should say rather than built. We're going to take the 2-mile shorter loop trail, which is marked by the red indications here. Now, Cheraw State Park was built in the 1930s by the CCC, which was the Civilian Conservation Corps. And you can see just by looking around here that this particular area was not well known for being very agricultural. It wasn't good for farmland. To be honest, it wasn't good for much else other than timber growing, if anything else. So one of the aspects of the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, was actually had two functions. One, it was part of FDR's New Deal to put young men to work and give them training skills. And what they would do is come out to areas like this and erect buildings and clear land for walking trails and different things like that. This trail was built much later than that. It was not built by the CCC, but there are structures on site that were built by the CCC. But also, it gave the opportunity to present some recreational area of land for that wasn't going to be used for too much else. Okay? Now, this is very typical of a longleaf pine ecosystem. Okay? And as we walk down the trail here, we'll show some more of the aspects of the longleaf pine ecosystem. Alright, we've walked just a few yards into the trail here, and this, as I mentioned, really does give you a little feel for what we mean by the longleaf pine ecosystem. First thing you may notice is several brush piles around here. Those, of course, are not natural. What has happened over the years, much of the open spaces here in this ecosystem have gotten filled with things like turkey oak, blackjack oak, some of your other lower growing shrubs that actually compete with the longleaf pine for nutrients and other circumstances. And there's a big effort underway to try to open up the forest here and create more of what a true longleaf pine ecosystem should look like. So all of these piles that you see are not natural here, but naturally it should be very wide open, very open. You can notice the predominant tree here is pine. Now, there's actually several different pines in this part of the park. There's longleaf pine, which is the native species. Loblolly can also grow here. Slash pine has been planted in here, so you actually have kind of a mixture of several different pines as well. The loblolly and the slash pine don't really hurt the longleaf pine, but the longleaf pine ecosystem is the one that's more desired to have here. Just kind of looking across the way here, you can see an area that has been opened up more. And if you notice, this is a good view. This is early morning when I'm shooting this video. And you can see there's a lot of sunlight now getting to the forest floor. And what that has allowed to happen is plants such as some of these ferns and other low-growing shrubs to begin growing. Now, people are often surprised to know that ferns are growing in this longleaf pine ecosystem, but they are. They may not be the typical ferns that you see growing in wet areas, but remember, ferns are a very broad category of plant, and they may grow in a variety of conditions. But previously, what had happened, this area was very congested. As you can see by the brush pile, here's what's been removed. And by removing all that, we've opened up the floor and allowed more sunlight, which again allows these smaller growing plants to come in and to survive. Now, here is a tree that is obviously not a pine. You can tell from the bark on it. It appears to be a blackjack oak, and I'll show you a better view of that a little later on in the trail. But I did want to show you something that grows on the side of this tree. This is very commonly seen in trees in our area. This is a substance known as lichen, and that's that gray-green material that you see growing in the bark. Lichen is what we call a mutualistic organism. By mutualistic, that means that it's actually two organisms that live together and both can actually benefit. Now, in the case of the lichen, what we have is an alga, which gives it the greenish color, because that is a form of plant. It's a photosynthetic organism. And since it's photosynthetic, it makes food for the organism. The other organism, though, in addition to the algae, is a fungus. And if you look at this, see if I can back up just a little bit here. This particular substance has kind of a crusty type appearance. All right, it's almost flaky in appearance there. That crustiness that we have with it is due to the fungus. It holds water in and prevents that algae from getting too dry, which in turn enhances its photosynthesis ability. So, essentially what happens is that the algae makes the food and the fungus decomposes nutrients and keeps the algae from drying out. Again, an organism where both are benefiting, so that's an example of mutualism. Now this is one type of lichen, but if I go down to the base of the tree here, you can see another one as well, kind of growing along there. Okay, now again we've continued along the turkey oak trail here. A couple of things I wanted to point out to you at this particular site. One is this plant right here. And I want to make sure I zoom in on it because I don't want to get too close. And hopefully you'll realize the reason that I don't want to get too close. This is poison oak. As you can see, if you look at the very tip of the leaf there, you can see that it has 3 leaves on it, and those others will begin to branch. But definitely something that you want to avoid if you are allergic to it. Now, also, over here, we have an example of the longleaf pine. Now, one thing that was done probably about 3 or 4 years ago now, there were signs posted on several of the different trees along the park site, both on the golf course, the boardwalk trail, and here on the turkey oak trail, describing some of the different types of plants. This was done in accordance with becoming Audubon certified. The park itself is not Audubon certified yet, although there are efforts being made underway, but the golf course is Audubon certified. It's one of the few courses that is Audubon certified in South Carolina. That's something we're very proud of here. Now, what we're looking at on this particular sign though, okay, this is describing our longleaf pine. Now you can see it says its needles or leaves grow 10 to 18 inches long, crowded clusters of 3 to a sheath. Cones are 6 to 10 inches long and dull brown. The strongest of the southern yellow pines is used for construction, railroad ties, poles, piling, and for pulp. This tree can grow on sites too dry and sterile for other yellow pines. Now, I'm going to back off here so that you can see the bark a little more effectively. And I'm also going to scan up so that you can see what it looks like from the ground. It's kind of hard to see what the needles look like here. We'll try to get a closer view of that. But just to give you an idea of what this longleaf pine looks like. Okay, here we're looking at 2 pine cones. One very tiny, as you've seen on the left, one much larger, as seen on the right. This is a good example of the difference between male and female reproductive parts in conifers. The cone on the left is sometimes called a pollen cone because that's what it produces, is pollen. It's much smaller in size. In contrast, the one on the right is the female cone, which is what ultimately produces seeds. Now, let me see if I can find another cone to show you here. Okay. Here's a closer view of the female pine cone. Now what you'll notice is a series of shelf-like features here. And if you look right here, right above my thumb, you can see a pine seed. Now what happens is each of these little shelf-like structures, which are actually modified leaves, form a seed. And after the pollen has fallen onto the egg in this cone, the cone closes up. But then after a period of time, when the seeds are mature, it opens up, and that will allow an opportunity for these seeds to fall off. You'll notice in a lot of these shelf-like structures, the seeds are already gone. But here you can see an example of where one is still remaining. Looking back through the area through which we've already walked so far, And I hope that you're beginning to see a little bit of a difference in terms of vegetation. Okay, this area is a little lower. All right, you can see by evidence of, here's a little walkway we're going to have to cross over. When we do get heavy rains, which we have not had this spring, it will be fairly damp through here. But you can see that that has changed our vegetation quite a bit. We're getting more vines. We're getting more what are termed to be hardwood trees. Now, hardwood trees are those that keep their leaves during the spring and summer, put them on in the spring and then keep them through the summer and lose them in the fall. Those are not pines. Pines are what we term evergreens. They literally stay green all year long. Our hardwoods are often deciduous. Now here we have a tree that is an evergreen, okay, but it's a little different than the pine. It's not a cone producing organism. This is an American holly, and let me back up so you can see some of the leaves a little better. It's a little dark there. Let's see if I can move in a little closer for you there. Yeah. Okay. Unfortunately, you can't see the red berries that are often associated with this American holly. Could be two reasons. One, it's very early in the spring and all the berries from last year may have been gone. But it also could be this is a male holly tree. Male holly trees do not have the red berries. Now, let's go over here and look at the sign to give you some background information on the American holly. Alright, evergreen branches and red berries provide winter holiday decorations, and the foliage provides shelter for many animals. Grows in rich, moist soil, which is going to be different from that of what the pines grow in, and it's fairly common throughout the eastern United States. Now, as we walk across our border here, again, we'll see a couple of vines. This is just what we often call greenbrier. This is something that some of you may have in your yards, and it becomes a nuisance quite often. Here's a good tree with some lichen on it that appears to be a red maple. And again, as we notice, we start seeing a difference in the vegetation here. Let's see if we can get a little closer view of some of the other plants that are here. Here's a good example, a fairly common tree in our part of South Carolina. Characteristic leaf shape. This is a sweet gum. Now it's not a very large sweet gum, as you can tell. Okay, and there are a couple of others very close by to it. Okay, but you can see the characteristic shape and leaf. Sweet gums can grow almost anywhere. They tend to be kind of swampy type trees and all as well. Okay. Looking up here, we also have an oak, and let's see if I can focus in on a leaf a little better for you. There's one right there. Okay. Now all of these, the oak and the sweet gum, are all what we term deciduous trees because they lose their leaves in the fall. That appears to be a water oak from the leaf that you see there. Okay. We also have some red maple around here and some willow oak. This right here appears to be the willow oak. Okay, kind of a long leaf, much like what you might see on a willow tree. And let me get down to the end here and we'll see if we can see some more examples maybe of some red maple. Let's see. Here's some red maple right here. And it's kind of hard to see, but it's mixed in with some sweet gum there on the right. But the red maple has a little red petiole on it which holds the stem, holds the leaf to the stem there. This is sometimes also called swamp maple as well. Here's a closer view of one of the ferns that does grow in the longleaf pine ecosystem, some type of bracken fern. And you can see, I'll widen it out here, that this is one of the areas that has been opened up. Again, getting more sunlight. Therefore, these low-growing shrubs can actually receive the light that they need in order to take off and grow. Okay, I don't know how well you can see it on the video here. We've actually kind of come up a slight rise here. This helps explain why we call this area the Sand Hills. Now, Cheraw State Park is kind of on the border between the Sand Hills and the coastal plain. The Turkey Oak Trail is very much more in the Sand Hills part of the border, but you can tell as you look at the soil, it is indeed very sandy, very dry, and consequently that will affect the nutrient composition. Water tends to drain very well out of these sandy, hilly areas, so consequently you're going to have vegetation here that can survive hot, dry conditions in the summertime. Well, some of the trees that do that, obviously, are pines, okay? And some of the other trees that we may see that can survive here include one right here, which is called a blackjack oak. Now, blackjack oak leaves can actually get much larger than this one that you've seen here, but that gives you a shape and also that you can see. The blackjack oak can survive hot, dry conditions. It also likes very acid soil. Soils that tend to be sandy and lose water easily tend to develop a low pH. And again, remember, we're dealing with the sand hills here. So they tend to have an acid soil. Blackjack oak can survive here, longleaf pine can survive here, loblolly pine can survive here, turkey oak can survive here, and I'll try to find an example of that for you to see in just a minute with the turkey oak. But again, characteristics of this as well. You can also see here too how the soil may wash when we start losing pine straw too. Okay. Now as I swing around here, you can see again open type areas, very much more like what longleaf pine systems used to look like. Okay. And I was hoping to catch a view of that skink or bird that I just saw moving over there, but no such luck today, I suppose. Okay. But again, you can kind of see going up a little hill here, all right, before we're going to make the turn, one of the turns on this loop. Okay, here's a good view of the turkey oak. It's actually pretty good ways off the trail here. But you can see that the leaf is very characteristically named turkey oak because it does have the shape of a turkey foot. Okay? Some people often refer to these as scrub oaks. Scrub oaks are actually several different types of oak, including blackjack oak. There is one actually called a scrub oak, but turkey oak. Basically, these are oaks that aren't very good for harvesting wood, and they don't get to real big sizes either, which is an advantage to them living in this area because they don't require as much water. They can get by with less water. Just kind of looking around at the base of the tree too, you can begin to see what appears to be some wild blueberry as well. Unfortunately, no blueberries on them at this point in time. Still a little early in the spring yet. Okay, here we have an example of a decaying stump. Wanted to point this out to you because you can see the action of fungi on that stump. They are feeding off of that dead material. Remember, the primary role of fungi in an ecosystem is to act as a decomposer, and that's exactly what this one is doing. This is what we sometimes call a shelf fungus, and you can kind of see it's arranged like shells on the side. Now remember, fungi also include mushrooms. I doubt I'll see many of those today because it has been so dry. Okay? However, those mushrooms that we may see growing also play a role as being a food source for certain animals. White-tailed deer eat mushrooms, fox squirrel and gray squirrel eat mushrooms, rabbits eat mushrooms. So there are lots of our smaller animals and larger animals that will feed on those as well. But here we have an example of a fungus actually feeding on a stump. Okay, here you see a couple examples of how pines are affected by weather conditions. Pines are known for having very long tap roots, which is a long singular type root that reaches far down into the water table. Well, that's what allows them to survive in these hot, dry, sandy, acid conditions. They can get to the water The downside is that that taproot provides an anchor such that when they are subjected to ice, for example, many of you have seen evidence of this maybe in your yards, particularly young pine trees, that taproot helps hold them in place, and rather than being uprooted, they simply start bending. So a lot of times by looking at vegetation and its shape, what's present, we can tell what has happened in the past, even though this may have happened 3 or 4 years ago. This probably happened, we had an ice storm around Christmas about 2 or 3 years ago now, and that's probably when this happened. The tree in the background there, the smaller tree, wasn't affected, and it's probably about 2 or 3 years old. So it was not young enough, or excuse me, not old enough to be affected, whereas these others were. And of course, sometimes they may just eventually snap. Pines are notorious for that in ice storms and in wind storms as well. Okay, here we have a good example of pines in various stages of development. Now, if you'll notice, right here, this is obviously the youngest pine. It doesn't look a whole lot different than a grass stage other than having, other than having that stem that we have there. Okay, what we're looking at here essentially is a baby pine tree. Okay, this is a pine seedling, and if you notice as I get closer to it, you can see the bud being very protected by those long leaf needles. Look how long they are compared to the bud. Now this is within probably the first year or so. Now in contrast, I'm going to flip over to the other side of the trail here, and you can see a comparison of what they're going to look, that particular pine seedling will look like in later years. Okay, this one right here looks a little taller. Okay, it's got a few months or maybe a year on the other one. Pines tend to stay very, very small for the first year or two, and then in about years 3, 4, and 5, they really start jumping up. And here you see a good comparison of some in different stages, and then even back behind here, here's another one that's starting to grow as well. Okay. The longleaf pine is particularly resistant to fire. Now, as I showed you earlier with that terminal bud, and I'll swing back over so you can see that a little better again. With this bud here, as I said, it's very well protected by those leaves. Okay, the leaves will burn, but yet there's quite a distance between this and that leaf. Now, the advantage is longleaf pine ecosystems before man came in were very prone to fire simply because of lightning strikes. And what that did was actually benefit the forest because the pines could survive, as could some of the other vegetation. But a lot of the competing vegetation, like what you see kind of in the background here, okay, could not survive. It would get burned away. Well, what that burning did was accomplish a couple of things. One, it reduced competition for nutrients. But secondly, by burning some other things, it recycled, it decayed those nutrients and helped replace them back into the ecosystem. There are some other species that actually benefit in other ways from the fire, but the pine doesn't actually get accelerated growth until it's been exposed to fire. So, a movement has been made to undergo a lot of what we term prescribed burning here at Cheraw State Park, which basically means a controlled burn. And what we're doing is, we may not have the lightning strikes, we may put those fires out before they wipe out large areas of forest now with wildfires. So we go in and we try to control the burns to help some of these organisms to survive. Okay, here we have another example of a lichen. Remember, a lichen is an algae and a fungus. Okay? But this one is not growing on trees, it's actually growing in the ground. It kind of takes on a crusty type appearance, as you can see there, kind of a gray-green color. Just as a comparison, here's an old limb with some of the other type of lichen. There are many types of lichen. But lichen can survive in conditions that are harmful or not so helpful to other organisms. And this type of lichen is known as reindeer moss because it can live in very cold temperatures and provides food for reindeer. Now obviously we don't have reindeer at Cheraw State Park, but we do have white-tailed deer, and they can feed on this as well. Now as a comparison, you can also see over to the side of the lichen something a little more green in color. That is actually a true moss. Okay? It's much softer in appearance and has more of a green color. It too grows on trees or at the base of trees, but it can also grow on the ground. But just as a comparison, so you won't confuse the two, let me back up here. The moss is the brighter green color, the lichen is the more gray-green color. Okay, here we have a sign representing the blackjack oak. This blackjack oak doesn't have a lot of leaves on it, but so I won't show you any leaves on it. But I did want you to be able to read about the blackjack oak here. It's a relatively small tree, 20 to 40 feet tall, grows in dry, infertile soil. Its leaves are very shallowly lobed and much broadened at the outer end. The bark is almost black, hence the name blackjack oak, deeply divided into square plates, as you can see there. It's used for charcoal and fuel. Wood is heavy and strong, but that's about the only use that it has. Okay, again we've continued down the trail, going a little uphill here. Okay, look back, that's the direction from which I have come, and then if I scan around here, you can see I'm probably about halfway up the hill. Now, again, sandy soil, reiterating, sand hills, sandy, dry soil, poor nutrients, limited in what types of vegetation can grow here, but actually one of the most diverse ecosystems that we have on Earth. There are so many small animals that we find that live in the longleaf pine ecosystem that don't thrive anywhere else. There's some debate as to whether the longleaf pine ecosystem is actually more diverse than the tropical rainforest. This is an area that's really becoming studied more and more. We've realized the significance of its downfall and are beginning to try to do things to conserve it for these animals that don't live anywhere else. And as we continue to study it, we find more and more in terms of diversity. Now, I mentioned the turkey oak earlier. There is a sign here with some information about the turkey oak on it. And you can see the characteristic shape of the leaf there. Okay, tree grows in poor sandy soil and can be up to 30 feet tall. It is a red oak with heavy hardwood of little value except for fuel. Leaves have 3 to 5 deeply divided lobes. The bark is dark gray tinged with red. And you can see a little bit of a reddish cast to it. Yeah, that's actually a pretty good view from that standpoint. Okay. Again, we've kind of made it to the top of the hill and we've come down the hill. One thing I wanted to point out to you here, I hope that you can kind of see the effects here of how washed the trail has become down through here. You'll notice it's not nearly as smooth looking. And if you look right here, you can see a very big area of wash type area. Well, part of that is because of the hill that we have with water running down it. But another problem here is, if you'll notice, there's not much pine straw on the trail at this point. Well, what has happened with that pine straw not being there, erosion was much more likely to occur. Pine straw itself plays an important role in a longleaf pine ecosystem for two things. One, as it breaks down, it returns nutrients back to the soils that the tree can reuse again to grow with. All right, so all is not lost in terms of all the energy that was used in making those needles to begin with. But also, as it falls on the forest floor, it does help prevent erosion as well. And here we see a good example of how significant and how important that is. Okay, here we have a good example of a fallen tree, which everybody knows says, okay, whoop-de-doo, big deal, fallen trees. Just to give you an idea of how long it takes nature to decompose and break down, and you can see on the end of the tree, there's some fungi growing on the end of it there. This tree probably fell down in Hurricane Hugo, which was in